You can never take rivalries in basketball for granted that last over the course of multiple seasons. Just the pure will of wanting to win against a specific opponent makes for some of the most entertaining basketball and storylines in the league. Not to mention the bragging rights between fan bases, this is always going to be welcomed by the wider basketball world. But there's always a catalyst to these rivalries, something that really lights the flame that burns for years to come. The Pacers and Bucks have maybe been one of the more unexpected rivalries in recent memory. Outside of being Central Division opponents for decades, there hadn't really been any historic bad blood. But the last 2 years, if anything, has made sure that future matchups just mean more. My name is Caleb, and with the 2025 NBA playoff field set, the Pacers and Bucks are due for a first-round matchup and a rematch from last year's playoffs. Typically, this would be your regular 4-5 matchup that could realistically go either way, but the beef between these two teams over the last 2 seasons gives these teams higher stakes for the franchises, the players, and the fan bases. The Pacers and Bucks are keeping the spirit of team rivalries alive, and it all started with the first ever in-season tournament and a stolen signature celebration. Fans were worried that the players wouldn't take the first ever in-season tournament seriously enough for it to matter, but surprisingly, we'd end up with a handful of genuinely great games. To make the stakes seem even higher, the single elimination, semifinal, and championship rounds were to be played at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas. Out of the 4 semifinalists, 2 were maybe expected: the Los Angeles Lakers and the Milwaukee Bucks, with their 2 All-NBA stars respectively leading the way. It wasn't a surprise to see them a game away from the first NBA in-season tournament championship. And then you have their 2 opponents, the New Orleans Pelicans and the Indiana Pacers. Both were underdogs in this situation, and both hadn't really been in the national spotlight recently, the Pacers especially. Despite not receiving any real attention from national media to that point in the season, they were the highest scoring and one of the most fast-paced teams in the league, and just about a month before, had beaten the Bucks in a thriller where Giannis would score 54 points in a loss. Now in the in-season tournament semis, the Pacers still had a chip on their shoulder, and the Bucks were looking to avenge their loss from a month earlier, and the Pacers, behind 27 points and 15 assists from Tyrese Halliburton, would take care of the Bucks by 9 in another characteristically high-scoring game for Indiana. The Pacers were showing that they were one of the most fun and deep teams in the league on the national platform, and in turn raised some questions about whether this Bucks team with Damian Lillard was legit. Some people would argue that the game from November 9th was the beginning of this rivalry, but most will point to about 48 seconds left in this game. Tyrese Halliburton hit a dagger 3 and then proceeded to pull out Damian Lillard's Dame Time celebration, a gesture that he himself felt he needed to speak on. Maybe a bit more bothered by it than he let on, he said he respected Halliburton but warned him to be humble because you never know when it ends. The Pacers, though, weren't too worried about what Dame or the Bucks had thought at the time. Halliburton post-game was excited that the wider NBA audience was finally going to recognize how good the Pacers were and could be. And despite losing the in-season tournament championship to the Lakers, the Pacers would show exactly that for the rest of the season. But that wouldn't come without a few more matchups against their Central Division rival. And the next time they'd meet would all but confirm that this was real beef between the two teams. On December 13th, 2023, not even a week after their in-season tournament matchup, they get right back to work in Milwaukee, and the Bucks absolutely punch the Pacers in the mouth. After a tightly contested first 3 quarters, Aaron Nesmith would commit a hard foul on Giannis that turned into a small scuffle. Things had been kind of heated throughout the game, but this was the point where it boiled over. Benches were almost ready to clear, but it was contained to just the floor, and Bobby Portis, hearing the crowd chant his name, was ready to go to war over his teammate. With the energy now shifted into the crowd, Giannis was going to make a memorable night even more memorable for everyone in Milwaukee. The Bucks would pull away and Giannis would score a franchise record 64 points as the Bucks would beat the Pacers 140-126. Nobody wants to be on the other end of a record-setting night, and for the Pacers, it wasn't the greatest feeling considering they had beaten them twice already over the previous month. Despite the scuffle during the game, post-game banter was pretty normal. The players and coaches greeting each other one last time before leaving the floor, but wait, is that Giannis being held back by his coaches and teammates? And is that the rest of the Pacers and Bucks arguing in the tunnel? Alright, if anyone has a record-setting performance in a game, you're probably going to take a memento with you. In Giannis's case, it was the game ball. So once the buzzer sounded and word got around that the Pacers may have taken it back to their own locker room, with the brewing bad blood between these teams, he was heated. Initially, you could see him having a rather charged conversation with Tyrese Halliburton, and Tyrese was looking very confused as to what was happening. Soon, Dame and Chris Middleton joined in backing up Giannis, and suddenly, the camera cuts to Giannis beelining it towards the Pacers locker room, followed by his brother Thanasis, Campaign, and Jay Crowder. This leads to the two teams without their superstars having a shouting match in the tunnel, with the only thing preventing a potential fight are the assistant coaches and security. Jalen Smith and Jay Crowder, who didn't even play in this game for their respective teams, seem to have had the most to say to each other. Whether it was longest tenured Pacer Miles Turner or newly acquired Buck Campaign, Indiana and Milwaukee were going to be very vocal about how much they didn't like each other. As Giannis made his way back to the floor, he'd come out to thunderous applause from the Milwaukee fans who thought they may be witnessing the start to another Malice at the Palace type situation. Eventually, the teams would go back to their locker rooms and the speculation of what really happened began in each team's post-game press conferences. After all the dust had settled, it turns out the Bucks security had secured the game ball immediately after the buzzer sounded, as seen here. But even then, Giannis was still not entirely convinced the ball he received was the actual game ball. Even Dame was still of the belief that the Pacers took the ball from Giannis, claiming the Pacers were just being straight up petty. And the Pacers did have a ball, just not the game ball. According to Pacers head coach Rick Carlisle, they wanted to have a memento of their own. Despite the 14-point loss, rookie Oscar Tshiebwe had scored his first point in the league in the fourth quarter. A Pacers tradition since Carlisle had returned to Indiana as head coach was that rookies get the game ball the game they scored their first points in, win or lose. But the ball received by Tshiebwe was a reserve ball that was never even used in the actual game. So while not technically a game ball, it was still symbolic of his first career milestone. Halliburton would call the entire situation a misunderstanding, which in the grand scheme of things it was. It's not entirely clear where this misunderstanding began to take place, but this game and the antics that took place afterward ensured that this rivalry was legit. It was going to be around for at least a little while. The Pacers and Bucks would play 2 more times in the regular season, bringing their total matchups against each other in the 2024 season to 5, one more game than the usual in-division rivalry. Indiana would travel back to Milwaukee on New Year's Day 2024 in a 9-point win just to beat them again at home 2 days later on January 3rd in another high-scoring double-digit win. The Pacers would win the season series 4-1, and the bragging rights currently belong to Indiana. The Pacers and Bucks would look fairly different by the time playoffs came, most notably the Pacers acquiring Pascal Siakam for Toronto for Bruce Brown, Jordan Nwora, and picks, but lost Bennedict Mathurin to injury. The Bucks lost Giannis to injury as well during the last week of the regular season and would start their playoff journey without him. The end of the season saw the Pacers clinch a playoff berth for the first time in 4 years, and the NBA scriptwriters couldn't have matched them up with anyone other than Milwaukee for the first round of the playoffs after the Bucks fell to the 3 seed. Milwaukee was headed into the playoffs without Giannis, but still had a favorable matchup against the younger Pacers. Game 1 was proof of that, as the more experienced and battle-tested Bucks would pull out a 15-point win. Indiana would bounce back with a vengeance though. Behind Siakam's 37-point night, they steal home court advantage and take Game 2. Bobby Portis vocalized his frustrations with Indiana, coining the term frontrunner. He and Andrew Nembhard had a small moment during the game, but nothing to write home about. Game 3 saw the Pacers and Bucks battle it out in overtime, but late game heroics from Tyrese Halliburton helped Indy take a 2-1 lead. Lillard would injure his Achilles tendon throughout the game and be sidelined for Game 4. And in the start of Game 4, with no Giannis and now no Dame, there was a vibe shift that Indiana needed and one that the Bucks just could not afford. Middleton, Portis, and Lopez, the longest tenured Bucks, had to lead the way for Milwaukee. With about 5 minutes to go in the first quarter, Nembhard and Portis would get tangled up under the basket and exchange a couple shoves. But unfortunately for Portis, some of the shoves from his end landed above the head and neck area of Nembhard, causing him to be ejected from the game. Despite the heroics of playoff Chris Middleton, the Pacers would pull away and take a 3-1 series lead headed back to Milwaukee. In Game 5, we'd be reminded of what Chris Middleton can do at this time of year. He and Bobby Portis would score 29 each, and Milwaukee would lock in on the defensive end to hold one of the highest scoring offenses in the league to just 92 to extend the series and send it back to Indiana, with Lillard returning for Game 6. But with the Pacers now on the verge of winning their first playoff series since 2014 in front of their home crowd, the depth of Indiana was on full display as their bench would outscore Milwaukee's 50-10, and they'd win the series in 6 games. Patrick Beverley, who had been relatively quiet throughout the series, summed up the series by throwing a ball at a fan, something he'd later be sued for. Meanwhile, the Pacers would make a run all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and the Bucks were 100% not bringing Pat Bev back for 2025. The 2024-25 season saw a bit of redemption for Milwaukee. They'd win the NBA Cup and beat the Pacers 3-1 in their 4 regular season matchups, with the Pacers' only win coming in a midseason classic where Tyrese Halliburton won the game on a 4-point play. The Pacers and Bucks are matching up again in the first round of the 2025 NBA playoffs, this time with a healthy Giannis, but no Damian Lillard for the moment. The NBA is always better when certain teams don't like each other, and the more frequent the matchup, the deeper the rivalry goes. My name is Caleb. If you want to support the channel, please like and subscribe. Appreciate y'all for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.